Watch, Mark, you've just made national news. I'm going to throw to a clip right here.
Many firms and attorneys have been targeted, among them Marc Elias, a longtime opponent of Trump, who is the only lawyer the president has named who was willing to appear on 60 Minutes. Elias and others are warning that Trump's assault on the legal profession threatens the rule of law itself. Elias says that for him, it began with the president's personal grudge.
Donald Trump hates me because I fight hard and I fight for free and fair elections. I insist on fighting for democracy in court, fighting for voting rights in court, and insist on telling the truth about what the outcome of the 2020 election was.
Are there risks in doing the work that you're doing?
I'd be an idiot not to be worried. The question, though, is what do you do? Right? Do you just cower in the corner? Do you just try to disappear? Do you just leave democracy to fend for itself? Or do you stand tall and do the best you can every day to represent your clients and try to preserve the rule of law?
Marc Elias first crossed Trump in 2016. He was the top lawyer for the Clinton campaign. Then in 2020, when Trump and allies challenged the election results, Elias fought in court and won. Trump calls him a thug.
Donald Trump is the walking embodiment of everything that is wrong with the American political system. And so when Donald Trump says that I am unethical or that I am undermining his vision of America, I say, boy, I must be doing something right.
So that was you appearing on 60 Minutes. And of course, for everybody watching right now, 60 Minutes has been in the news because the executive producer, Bill Owens, had just resigned because the parent company of CBS, that's Paramount, has been looking to have some oversight into what they put out on the network because they don't want to endanger a proposed merger that they need approval from the Trump administration for. So first off, I want to talk about why this moment in particular was especially significant for you to appear on that show, on that network.
Yeah, so look, I mean, there are two answers. The first is that they approached me and said that they wanted to do a story about the attack on law firms and law firm capitulation. And it became clear as I was having a back and forth with them about this that they were not having success finding any partners at big law firms who were in the mix here willing to talk on camera. And I had made a pledge to myself when Donald Trump got elected, and you and I talked about this, that I was not going to back down. I was not going to retreat. I was going to stand up and speak out and tell it like it is, regardless of what the consequences might be. So that's the first answer. The second is that precisely because this is a moment in which Donald Trump is trying to exact a settlement from CBS for a frivolous lawsuit, just like he was able to do against ABC News, just like he's been able to do, and you and I have talked about it on this series over and over again about billionaires bending the knee, that I thought it was important that if there was a production of a news piece going forward in the face of those threats, in the face, as you say, of reported oversight or potential oversight by the parent company of the content, that the least I could do would be to lend my voice and tell the truth.
What do you make of the fact that, as was mentioned in that clip that I just played, you were the only lawyer who was willing to come forward? What does that say?
Yeah, so to be clear, I was the only lawyer who has been targeted by Donald Trump to come forward. There was actually an associate from one of the law firms that was targeted who spoke, and I thought she was excellent. And in some ways, my admiration to her, she actually resigned her job as a lawyer at Skadden Arps rather than participate in their capitulation. But I mean, to your larger point, I think it is a real sign of the times that even lawyers who are very well protected in this society, who have all of the advantages of education and academic pedigree and income, even they are afraid of Donald Trump right now. And that is going to be a cancer on our society. If lawyers are not willing to speak out, if media personalities are not willing to speak out, and Scott Pelley was, by the way, so kudos to the team at 60 Minutes and CBS. But if universities bow down, then we're not going to stand a chance to protect democracy from what Donald Trump is up to. So So I wish I wasn't the only lawyer targeted by Donald Trump who was in that piece. I didn't expect to be the only one in the piece, but so be it.
I couldn't help but notice that this piece came in the immediate aftermath of the big resignation from Bill Owens, where he was worried that Paramount was going to have too much oversight into the editorial independence of 60 Minutes, and that's why he left the program to push back against exactly that. And so, what would you say about the fact that in the immediate aftermath of his resignation, that this isn't exactly them shying away from Donald Trump. In fact, this is the polar opposite. This is them taking a very aggressive, forward leaning tack when it comes to this administration.
Yeah, like I said, my admiration, Scott Pelley, who was the person who, was the anchor for this piece. He also is the person who ended the 60 Minutes episode last week
Yeah.
by praising Bill Owens. So he deserves a lot of credit here, as do the others at 60 Minute. And this is the kind of fearless media that we need in this moment, and we
Yep.
get too little of. And it's you and I have talked about it. It's why I started Democracy Docket to be fearlessly pro democracy in its coverage. And it's good to see one of the big legacy shows, 60 Minutes, really, in some ways, the most prominent of those shows standing up as well.
I do want to throw to another clip right here.
In this memo 6 weeks ago, Trump says Elias is an example of grossly unethical misconduct. The president directs the attorney general to seek sanctions against any lawyer, anywhere, for unreasonable and vexatious litigation against the government. Unreasonable, apparently, in the eye of the president. Are we reaching a point where a person will go to a law firm with a case that is opposed to the President of the United States, and the law firm will think, do we really want to take this case?
We're already there. They are deciding not to take on certain kinds of clients that might upset the administration, or not taking on certain kinds of causes that might put them in the crosshairs of the administration.
If lawyers give up their independence, what is lost?
The rule of law. And this is why the business community ought to care. Today, it might be that, Donald Trump thinks he can take over the election system through one of his executive orders. Tomorrow, maybe it's the banking system. After that, maybe it's contracts. Maybe he decrees, I'm going to decide which contracts are binding and which contracts aren't binding. So the legal system is fundamental to how our society operates, how capitalism operates, and everyone should have a stake in that.
Mark, can you explain this further? Because right now I think so much of what Trump tries to do is devolve everything into tribalistic, partisan politics. But in fact, how could this have an impact on the broader economy on which we all rely, left, right, and center, if Trump is able to get his way in terms of dismantling our democracy as he's trying to right now?
Yeah, so look, all of our society assumes that we have rule of law. All of our society assumes that we have a functioning democracy. The fact is, rule of law is really good for capitalism. It is what allows you to go to the bank and give them money and understand that when you want it back, you'll be able to get it back,
Right.
because there are rules that the banks have to follow. There are rules that you, as the customer, have to follow. It is the reason why when mega company A wants to buy mega company B, like, for example, apparently the deal between Paramount and whatever the company is that is doing this merger, right? They have an agreement, and that agreement obligates the two parties, and it is based on rule of law. What we're actually seeing in that agreement, from what I read in the newspaper, is actually the interference, or the potential interference, I don't know, of Trump regulators to try to get in the way of that. And so if you care about the rule of law, if you care about the ability to make a deal and have it stick, then you have to care about democracy. You cannot want Donald, or allow Donald Trump to get away with, targeting law firms and saying you can't work for this person, targeting universities and saying you can't teach that, targeting media outlets and saying you cannot publish or you cannot broadcast things that we don't like. Because once you start down that road, then Donald Trump can come for you next. He may have started by coming after lawyers like me. He may have started by going after universities that he didn't like. But I promise you this, it's not going to end there.
Right, right. He's also been especially focused on this idea of spurring investment back into the US. But in fact, are companies going to be more or less inclined to invest in the US if they're seeing that the very system that would allow them to function and prosper, which is a safe, sound, healthy capitalist society, would actually be undermined by the very person who claims that he's trying to help bolster our business efforts?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have lawyers willing to work for all comers, right? If you don't have lawyers who are willing to work for causes and clients that the president may not like, then you're simply not going to have a functioning legal system. And that will hurt the small business owner. It will hurt the nonprofit advocacy organization. It will hurt the people who are immigrants who desperately need the legal protections. But if corporate CEOs don't understand it will also hurt them,
Right.
then they're just putting their head in the sand.
Right.
And the corporate CEOs may not be the first that Donald Trump will come for, but I promise you, he will eventually come for them.
And I want to finish off with this. We saw Governor Mills from Maine basically tell Donald Trump in the White House that when he challenged her in the White House back in February that she'll see him in court. Turns out that she did. The White House opted to settle and asked Maine to drop its lawsuit against them. And so this is her standing her ground, standing on business, fighting back, and winning. And can you talk about that in relation to this broader idea of you have all of these companies, all of these law firms, all of these universities, all of these tech billionaires, all of these media outlets that are opting to capitulate, but when you actually do opt to fight back, like Governor Mills did out of Maine, and like Perkins Coie did in their winning lawsuit just a few days ago, these institutions are largely beating Donald Trump in court. In fact, the vast majority of these cases that go to court, Trump loses in. And so it's not just that if they had just stood on business, they would have won in court anyway, but they actually would have retained some of their dignity insofar as that actually matters to any of these people.
Absolutely. And look, I wrote about this for Democracy Docket earlier today. That the fact is that the judge in the case that you mentioned, where Perkins Coie won, this is the law firm, my former law firm, that fought back, and a federal judge said that the executive order targeting them was unconstitutional and had to be stricken. She included a footnote in which she basically said, hey, law firms, what client's going to want to hire you
Yeah.
if you won't zealously represent their interests in court? And, it caused me when I wrote this piece to say, all of these law firms who thought the business imperatives were to cave to Trump may want to reconsider it because, it may be that the federal judge you appear before after you've caved won't be so impressed that you are such great lawyers. And so, we need to create more of that culture. We need to create a sense that if you stand up to the bully, if you are more like a Governor Mills, if you are more like a Harvard University, if you are more like a Perkins Coie, and you are more willing to stand up, and for that matter, Brian, like you do fearless independent media every day. If you're more in that mold, you will be rewarded not just by having being able to look yourself in the mirror, not just having your own dignity, but you will also be rewarded because there is a premium right now on the people who are willing to stand up and do what is right, who are willing to stand up and say what is true in a world in which Donald Trump has sycophants who are telling him lies and bowing down to him at every turn.
Look, I think we would be foolish not to put you at the top of that list. The fact that in a space where we have seen so much capitulation as it relates to these other law firms, as it relates to the folks who've gone the way of Paul Weiss, for you to not only stand on the side of the Perkins Coies and Covingtons and of course ELG, your firm, but then to go on this nationally broadcast program at a time when there is a lot of attention on 60 Minutes in light of Bill Owens resigning just last week. now for you to be the face of this movement, I think gives the permission structure that was so desperately needed for all of these folks to know that, look, we can stand up, we can stand tall against what this administration is doing. If Mark is willing to go on national TV at a time when more people are paying attention to this program than ever before, and to stand up for what's right, to stand up for democracy in and of itself, I know that that's going to have major implications on the next law firm that might not have been sure if it was worth it to actually stand up and put themselves in the crosshairs of this administration, to know that it is okay to fight, it is okay to push back against what this White House is doing. And at the end of the day, very much like what we're seeing with Perkins Coie, very much like what we're seeing with Governor Mills, that you all are going to be the ones that win at the end of this. So look, I speak on behalf of a lot of people who are watching right now and saying thank you for making sure to stand up and to unapologetically and fearlessly defend democracy and the rule of law, and to make yourself the face of this broader project. So, grateful to be able to have these conversations with you, and grateful for what you're doing more broadly. So, with that said, a small step that we all can take from the outside to support the invaluable work of Mark and his team is to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. It's also an invaluable resource that I use on a daily basis, and I read it every single day. So I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.